Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
It was Halloween night in a small town that prided itself on its decorations and festivities. Houses glowed with jack-o'-lanterns, fake cobwebs stretched across porches, and the streets were crowded with children in costumes. But that year, something felt off. The air was unusually heavy, and even the laughter of trick-or-treaters sounded hollow. A group of teenagers decided to explore an abandoned house on the edge of town, a place whispered about for decades. Locals said it had been empty since a family vanished mysteriously on Halloween night, never to be seen again. Armed with flashlights and the bravado of youth, they entered through a broken door, the hinges squealing like a scream. Inside, the air was thick and musty, smelling like decay. The walls were covered with faded, grotesque drawings of figures wearing masks, and on the floor, they found old, rotting costumes scattered as if someone had fled in a hurry. One of the teens, trying to joke, picked up a mask. The moment it touched his hands, a cold, piercing whisper echoed through the room, saying, "Don't take me with you." Panic set in as shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, twisting across the walls. One teen tried to leave, but the door slammed shut on its own. The whispers grew louder, now joined by the faint sound of children giggling, though no one was there. They ran through the house, finding each room more disturbing than the last. Mirrors reflecting figures that weren't in the room, furniture moving slightly as if alive, and distant knocks that followed them no matter where they went. Finally, they stumbled into the basement. The flashlight flickered, and in the dim light, they saw hundreds of small, carved pumpkins, each with eyes that seemed almost real. One of the teens bent closer, and the pumpkin's mouth opened, not carved but moving, saying, "You shouldn't have come." The air grew icy, their breaths visible in the sudden cold. They tried to escape, but the stairs collapsed, forcing them to crawl through a narrow tunnel. At the end, they burst out into the night, only to find the town silent, deserted, and coated in an unnatural fog. From the shadows, they saw figures, tall, masked, and silent, watching them, moving closer with each heartbeat. They ran blindly, reaching the main street where suddenly the fog lifted. The town appeared normal again, crowded with people and children. But when they looked at each other, the horror hit. They were the only ones in costumes, and on their hands, the dirt from the abandoned house refused to wash away. To this day, no one knows who or what haunted that house. The teenagers left town the next day, but every Halloween they say they see shadowy figures lurking just beyond the glow of the jack-o'-lanterns, watching, waiting, and whispering, Next year, it's your turn."
Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 2.
It was Halloween night in a small, sleepy town where everyone knew each other's business. The streets were eerily quiet, except for the occasional sound of footsteps on cracked sidewalks. A group of teenagers decided to dare each other to visit the old Whitmore house at the edge of town. The house had been abandoned for decades, rumored to have been the site of a gruesome murder, and everyone in town avoided it, especially at night. As they crept up to the house, the air turned unnaturally cold. The door was slightly ajar, creaking softly in the wind. One of them, a boy named Ethan, dared the others to go inside first. The second he stepped over the threshold, the door slammed shut behind him with a deafening thud. The group tried to open it, but it was stuck as if held by an invisible force. Inside, the house was filled with shadows that seemed to move on their own. Every step they took echoed unnaturally, and the faint smell of decaying flesh hung in the air. In the living room, they found old photographs of the previous owners, but the faces were scratched out, and some had dark, almost wet-looking stains across them. Then a whisper came from upstairs, a voice calling Ethan's name. Against his better judgment, Ethan went up the stairs alone. The others waited below, hearts pounding. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the house. When they ran upstairs, the hallway was empty, except for a trail of wet footprints leading to a room at the end. The door was slightly cracked, and a dim light flickered from within. When they pushed the door open, they saw Ethan standing in the middle of the room, his eyes wide with terror, staring at the wall. On the wall were messages written in what looked like blood. "He is here. You are next." Ethan tried to speak, but his voice was gone. Then the door slammed behind them, and the room went completely dark. One of the teens pulled out a phone for light, but the battery was dead. Another tried to scream, but no sound came out. Then from the shadows, figures emerged, twisted, faceless forms that moved in jerky, unnatural ways. They reached for them silently, and in a panic, the group ran toward the stairs. The steps seemed endless, stretching and bending, as if the house itself was alive. When they finally burst through the front door, the street was empty, and the house looked normal, like nothing had ever happened. But Ethan was gone. They searched for hours, but there was no trace of him. The next day, the town found the house abandoned again, quiet and still. No one ever spoke about what happened that night. But every Halloween after, the neighbors swear they see a pale figure staring from the upper window. And sometimes if you listen closely, you can hear a whisper calling your name.
Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 3.
It was a crisp Halloween night in a quiet suburb, the kind of night where the air feels heavier than usual, like it's holding its breath. A group of friends, Maya, Liam, and Jordan, decided to explore an old abandoned house at the edge of town. Locals whispered it had been left untouched since the 1980s, the year a family had vanished without a trace. They laughed nervously as they approached, telling themselves it was just an adventure, a thrill for Instagram stories. The house loomed in the shadows, its windows dark, its front door hanging slightly open, creaking with each gust of wind. As soon as they stepped inside, the air turned cold, unnaturally cold, and the faint smell of decay made their stomachs churn. Their flashlights barely pierced the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and walls scribbled with childish drawings that looked wrong. Faces twisted in agony, words scratched into the walls that seemed to plead for help. Probably just some kids messing around, Liam said, but even he didn't sound convincing. They wandered deeper, each step echoing like a scream through the empty house. Then they found the basement door. It was locked, but Jordan, ever the thrill seeker, forced it open. A stench hit them, wet, metallic, like blood mixed with something rotting. They shined their flashlights down the steps and froze. The basement was filled with small wooden chairs arranged in a circle. In the center sat a dusty, cracked doll, its eyes wide open, staring straight at them. Suddenly, a noise came from the shadows. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling them. They spun around, but the hallway was empty. Panic surged, and they bolted for the stairs, but the door slammed shut before they could reach it. Trapped. The lights flickered, and for a brief moment they saw figures, small, pale, and hunched over, standing just beyond the beam of their flashlights. Whispers filled the room, unintelligible but urgent, demanding. The doll's head turned slightly, its cracked mouth opening in a silent scream. Maya screamed, banging on the door. "Who's there? This isn't funny!" But the voice that answered wasn't human. It was guttural, almost a growl, yet it spoke in their own voices, repeating secrets they had never told anyone. Liam tried to pry the door open with a chair, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, closer, until the shadows seemed to press against them, suffocating them. Then, as suddenly as it began, the noises stopped. The door creaked open and the basement was empty. No doll, no chairs, no shadows, just the echo of their own terrified breaths. They ran out of the house and didn't stop until they reached the streetlights, panting, shaking. When they returned the next day, police and neighbors reported the house had been boarded up for decades. No one had lived there since the family vanished. Even stranger, the basement door had always been sealed from the inside. When they looked back, a single word was etched into the front door: stay. To this day, the three friends refused to speak about what they heard, what they saw, or what followed them out of that house. And every Halloween, each of them wakes at exactly 3:17 a.m. to a whisper in their ear, repeating that same word, stay.
Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 4.
It was Halloween night, the kind where the fog clings low to the ground and the streetlights flicker like they're struggling to stay alive. A group of college friends decided to walk through the outskirts of town, near the abandoned Miller farmhouse that had been empty for decades. Everyone whispered stories about it. The woman who had vanished inside years ago, the children who were said to have never left. They laughed nervously as they stepped onto the crumbling porch, daring each other to go inside. The door creaked open with a sound like a scream muffled in thick cloth. Inside, the air was thick and damp, smelling like rot and rust. Old furniture was scattered, broken mirrors hung askew, and strange symbols were scratched into the walls. One of them, Mark, jokingly tapped on the wall, and the scratching beneath it answered back, soft and deliberate, like fingernails dragging. The group froze. A low whisper slithered through the house. "Get out!" Heartbeats racing, they tried to leave, but the front door slammed shut violently, trapping them inside. They heard footsteps above them, slow and uneven, circling, though no stairs were visible. Every room they ran into seemed to shift, walls moving, hallways stretching longer than possible. Then they saw it, a figure in the corner, pale, its eyes hollow, grinning unnaturally wide. It didn't move, yet they felt its gaze following them as they backed away. Sarah screamed when she touched the wall. It felt alive, pulsing under her fingers like the house itself was breathing. The lights of their phones flickered, revealing scratches on the floor leading straight to a tiny door that none of them had noticed before. A soft, wet whisper came from it. "Play with us." Curiosity and terror warred, and against their instincts, they opened it. Inside was a small room, walls smeared with a dark substance that smelled of decay, and dolls hung from the ceiling by strings tied around their necks. They weren't normal dolls. Each one had eyes that blinked. The friends ran, screaming, back through the twisting halls, but one by one, the shadows stretched toward them, and Mark vanished. A hand cold as ice clamped over his mouth, dragging him into the darkness. The others barely escaped when the front door finally gave way, throwing them onto the cold, foggy ground outside. When the police investigated the farmhouse the next day, it was empty. No Mark, no signs of struggle, just the faint sound of whispering echoing in the empty rooms. The only clue left behind was a small, lifelike doll in the shape of Mark, sitting in the middle of the floor, smiling. Every Halloween since, locals say if you get too close to that house, you'll hear whispers calling your name, and some say the house hungers for new friends to play with.
Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 5.
It was a chilly October night in a small, quiet town where Halloween was always more than just costumes and candy. It had a reputation for strange disappearances that locals whispered about but never confirmed. A group of friends, daring each other to explore the abandoned mansion at the edge of town, decided to see if the rumors were true. The mansion had been empty for decades after a family vanished without a trace, leaving the house to decay with broken windows and creaking floorboards that seemed to groan in the wind. Armed with flashlights and a mix of bravado and fear, the friends pushed through the rusted gate, laughing nervously. Inside, the air was thick and damp, carrying the smell of mildew and something faintly metallic. As they moved from room to room, the floors whispered under their steps. In the main hall, an old chandelier swayed despite the lack of breeze, casting fractured shadows across walls lined with faded family portraits. The eyes in the painting seemed alive, following every movement. Suddenly, one of them froze. A soft whisper echoed through the hall, just behind them, too quiet to be clear but unmistakably saying a name, one of their own. Panic surged as they turned to find no one there. The whispering grew, multiple voices now, chanting indistinctly, overlapping each other like a choir of murmurs. The air grew colder, frost forming on the edges of the cracked windows. One friend ran toward the exit, only to find the door slammed shut, and the lock jammed as if held by invisible hands. The friends huddled together, realizing the mansion seemed alive, reacting to their fear. Floorboards shifted beneath them, doors creaked open and closed on their own, and faint figures flitted in and out of the corners of their vision. In a small study, they found a diary belonging to the missing family, describing nightly visits from a shadowy figure that came to collect what belonged to the house. The entries grew frantic, ending with a chilling final line. "It watches from the mirrors. Do not look." Curiosity overcame fear for one of them. She glanced into a cracked mirror across the room, and her scream pierced the silence. The reflection showed not her face, but the face of a hollow-eyed, grinning stranger behind her, even though no one was there. When the others spun around, she was gone. The whispering intensified into screaming, echoing through the walls. They fled blindly through the hallways. the mansion's layout seeming to twist and change, trapping them in a maze. Only two made it out that night, battered and shivering. Their friends vanished as if swallowed by the house itself. Outside, the town seemed calm, the streetlights flickering in the autumn wind, but the mansion stood silent, waiting. Years later, locals claim that on Halloween night, the mansion still calls to those brave or foolish enough to enter, whispering their names in voices that are not their own, and that some who go in never come out. And if you listen closely near the old gate, you might hear the soft scratching of fingernails against wood, still trying to escape.
Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 6.
It was a chilly Halloween night in a small town, the kind where the fog rolls in thick and the streetlights barely pierce the darkness. A group of friends, Jake, Melissa, Aaron, and Sophie, decided to explore an abandoned house at the edge of town, a place everyone whispered about, but no one dared enter. Locals said the house had been empty since a family vanished decades ago, leaving behind only scattered belongings and the lingering smell of decay. The group laughed nervously as they stepped through the creaking front door. Inside, the air was cold, stale, and heavy, and the floorboards groaned under each step. They joked about ghosts and monsters, trying to shake the feeling of unease creeping up their spines. As they wandered deeper into the house, Jake found an old, dusty trunk in the corner of what had once been a living room. The lock had been broken, and inside were yellow children's clothes, toys, and a small, cracked mirror. Melissa picked up the mirror and wiped the dust away. In it, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Behind them in the reflection stood a figure, tall and thin, wearing what looked like a tattered Halloween costume. When she spun around, the hallway was empty. She laughed shakily, trying to convince herself it was a trick of the light. But then Aaron froze, staring at the staircase. A shadow moved against the wall, slow, deliberate, and human-shaped. The friends tried to leave, but the front door slammed shut with a deafening bang. They ran toward it, only to find it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as whispers began echoing through the house, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. They couldn't make out the words, but the tone was menacing, like laughter twisting into cries. Sophie screamed when she felt a hand grip her shoulder, but when she spun around, there was no one there. Suddenly, the lights of their phones flickered, revealing something horrifying. The walls were now covered in crude drawings of stick figures in pain, and each figure had a date written under it. One date was today, another was last year. Every Halloween, it seemed, the house recorded something, and whoever entered could become part of its collection. The whispers grew louder, shaping into words that chilled them to the bone. Stay with us, forever. The friends scrambled, banging on windows and doors, but the house seemed alive, shifting and twisting, turning hallways into endless loops. Aaron vanished first. One moment he was holding Melissa's hand, the next he was gone, his scream swallowed by the walls. Jake, Melissa, and Sophie ran blindly, only to find themselves back in the room with the trunk. The mirror now showed their reflections, but their faces were distorted, eyes hollow and mouths stretched in silent screams. Sophie, in terror, reached to smash the mirror, but as her hand touched the glass, she felt it pull her in. She vanished without a sound, leaving Jake and Melissa alone. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. Time seemed meaningless. Jake and Melissa finally found the front door slightly ajar and ran into the foggy street. Gasping for air, they dared to look back. The house was still, silent as if nothing had happened. But when they reached their car, Jake checked his phone and froze. In his gallery was a photo they hadn't taken, the mirror, showing 3 figures standing behind them, grinning in the dim candlelight of the abandoned house. The next morning, the townspeople noticed that the house looked lived in. Curtains had moved, and lights flickered faintly. Jake and Melissa never spoke of what happened again, but every Halloween, people swear they see 3 figures in tattered costumes watching from the windows, waiting for the next curious souls foolish enough to enter. The house still waits, and it remembers.